There is a false narrative that is often perpetuated in regards to President Trump and his disdain for mainstream media, and that is that he started it, that he's the only guy who uses the term fake news, that conservatives have followed his lead, and now journalism is under attack mostly by the right side of the aisle. In fact, this is not actually the case, and we're seeing that very clearly now in a Twitter battle between AOC and NBC. You see, what a lot of people may not realize is that the progressive left is just as skeptical of the establishment as sort of the populist right. So, as I was a reporter working in television news, I often found, especially when I covered politics, which I frankly did not do that often because I was an environmental reporter, but in the amount of time that I did cover politics, like during the 2016 presidential campaign, and as somebody who was assigned to cover the Hillary watch party on the night of the election, I found that actually there was a lot more empathy toward Trump voters from the Bernie Sanders left than from the Hillary left. And again, that is because there is an equal amount, I would say, of skepticism towards sort of like the power elite from the Bernie camp and the Trump camp, which would be seen sort of, I think, as the populist sides of either party. And we're seeing now, as AOC has sort of gone head to head with NBC News, how this plays out on the left. So this is the original tweet. You can see in the white portion here by NBC News, and it reads, "In one of the shortest speeches of the DNC, Representative Ocasio-Cortez did not endorse Joe Biden. Quote, I hereby second the nomination of Senator Bernard Sanders of Vermont for President of the United States of America." If you don't know a lot about politics, you may read this tweet and first say, she was really pithy because, I don't know, maybe she's got an axe to grind with the DNC. She doesn't really like Joe Biden, and so she just kept it short. And you may also think that she went rogue and endorsed Bernie Sanders over Joe Biden as if like that was some kind of explosive choice on her part, that she doesn't want to go along with the establishment, and she's still hurt that Bernie Sanders did not win. But in fact, that's not the case, and NBC News added an editor's note to the tweet after a lot of blowback on Twitter in response to it, and it says, first, editor's note and clarification. This tweet should have included more detail on the nominating process. We have deleted the tweet to prevent its further spread, but it can be seen here for the record. You scroll down to see the number 2 of 2 tweets. It says, Ocasio-Cortez was asked by the DNC to second Sanders' nomination. The nomination is a procedural requirement of the convention. Ocasio-Cortez has previously endorsed Biden, and her speech was similar in length to other nominating speeches. So first off, saying that she was asked by the DNC to second Sanders' nomination because this is a procedural requirement of the convention, so she did not go rogue. And secondly, that Ocasio-Cortez had previously endorsed Biden and that her speech was similar in length to other nominating speeches, so she didn't just talk for a couple of minutes because she was mad at everybody. So in between that first tweet and the second tweet with the editor's note was a maelstrom with AOC basically calling out NBC for its terrible headline. This is her first tweet. It says, so at NBC News, how are you going to fix the incredible amount of damage and misinformation that you are now responsible for? Because a 1:15 a.m. tweet to slip under the radar after blowing up a totally false and divisive narrative across networks isn't it. And then she wrote, at NBC News still hasn't apologized. It doesn't matter how big a legacy brand a news division has. This kind of manipulative behavior is dangerous and needs to be checked. We saw what happened in 16. This recklessness will easily extend to the Dem ticket if it doesn't stop now. The reason that I bring this to your attention is because as I do media analysis on this channel, I want to make it really clear that the skepticism toward what's often called corporate media or like traditional mainstream media, establishment media, does not just belong to one political party. That there are people across the political spectrum who find themselves wondering if we're getting the full truth when we consume corporate mainstream media, that especially in topics that could potentially have political buy-in, that there's facts that are contextualized inappropriately or just withheld altogether. And in this particular case, I think we're seeing that the progressive left feels just as disenfranchised and perhaps even attacked. You see Soledad OBrien, a longtime anchor at CNN, weighing in on this. She says connecting at AOC to some kind of political drama is click-worthy. It was done with intention. Yeah, I guess it probably was done with intention, but what level of intention, I think we're speculating when we say that. It is possible the headline was written very quickly. It's possible that it was written by an intern. It's possible it was written by somebody who's 23 years old and just got out of college a year ago and doesn't really know how the political process works. I think to assume that there was some kind of nefarious intent or malfeasance on the part of NBC News is a stretch. I mean, it's possible, but I will say that, like, in my experience in the news business, it's usually a mistake made in an error of confirmation bias, that you don't have the contextual or historical knowledge yourself, and so you don't give it to the viewers. I bring your attention to this quick clip from The Hill, which I think is very spot on.
And that's, I think, the real story here to me is the complete political illiteracy of the people who are supposed to tell you about politics. How does NBC News not understand that it was a nomination speech for Bernie Sanders and it had nothing to do with Biden and that it was all pre-orchestrated and much of that?
But I will say this is really where a problem arises on a regular basis in journalism in 2020, and that is that there are a lot of people giving us information that may not have a lot of background or context in what it is that they're covering. People are getting younger. There are folks who are just out of college now working in network news, and perhaps they've never covered a Democrat national convention before, and they just don't know how the process works. Now, that does not excuse it, but I do think that tweets like this one from Jay Rosen, who is a journalism professor at NYU, it is giving a little bit too much credit to conspiracy on the part of NBC News. He writes, "It's a mistake to attribute it only to the social media team. Dozens of journalists were on duty for NBC last night. They knew how misguided this was. The account broadcasting this pathetic error speaks in the name of the entire news division, but no one took ownership till 1 a.m. It is true that there are a lot of different kinds of journalists working together in a newsroom, but often they're separated from each other and everybody's working on their own thing. Each division specifically may even be working in totally different parts of the newsroom. Like if you're on the web team, you're on stage left, and if you're in TV, you're stage right, and nobody's necessarily communicating with each other throughout the day. Modern newsrooms, interestingly enough, are still very divided by the media content. So like if you're on the web team or you're on social media or you're the TV person, you may not be talking to one another at all. So just because there are a lot of journalists there doesn't mean that they're all paying attention to what the other people are doing. Now, that said, I think we should be communicating better in newsrooms, because the more voices and the more eyes on one particular headline or another may avoid a situation like this. And I feel like when I was in TV news not too long ago, that we were still not doing a great job of seeing the newsroom as this sort of fluid teamwork environment. We should have been communicating a lot more, and we should have been offering criticism to one another a little bit more than we were, holding each other accountable and giving sort of a checks and balances to one another instead of just like going with whatever the station decided it was going to do. I will differentiate, as I normally do, between the national news scene and the local news scene, because local news reporters tend to be closer to the topic they're covering and thereby usually understand it better. They understand the nuances better, and frankly, they have better buy-in to make sure they get it right, because they have to see their community when grocery shopping. That said, when a local news station is covering a topic that is national and not happening necessarily in their area, they typically are regurgitating what the network is saying. So they're like an NBC affiliate. They're going to just take the copy written by the NBC network and put it back on their website or on their television station. CBS is the same, ABC, all of those different network affiliates when it comes to national topics are typically just taking what sort of the mothership is saying and then repeating it in their local environment. One time I was covering a story, actually not too long ago, right before I quit TV news, And I really needed to read a Senate report to better understand what it was that I was going to be putting on the news in just a couple of hours, but I did not have enough time. And I sort of voiced my frustration about that, and one of my coworkers told me to just repeat what NBC says because they typically get it right. I, of course, knowing everything that I have now shared with you in this video, said I'm not going to just repeat what NBC says because, frankly, especially as the environmental reporter, I felt like I probably had a better grip on the topic I was covering than a reporter in New York City. But it just goes to show that even in local newsrooms, there's still a defense of and trust in the mainstream networks and their ability to get it right. If you have a certain logo by your newsroom, then you must be right. And if you're an independent person on YouTube, you deserve an extra level of skepticism. It was a trust in the mainstream way of doing things that I did not share. I grew increasingly skeptical of our getting it right. And I started to understand the way that the general public was feeling towards mainstream media, and decided that if I wanted to try to regain the trust of people in the institution of journalism, that I was going to have to stop being unilaterally defensive of the industry, start meeting people at their frustrations, start talking about our failures, and then try to do better in the future, which is, I guess, where I'm going to leave this video. It is once again a reflection that oftentimes the battle between the president and the newsrooms, like when you watch these White House press conferences, gets politicized itself as if the skepticism of journalism is only coming from one political party. And we saw today that that's not, in fact, the case. Again, I'm Allison Morrow. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. That doesn't hurt my analytics. It just shows YouTube that you hated it enough to engage with me. And subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon for notifications when I upload new videos, and I will see you next time.